Hello and welcome, everyone. I appreciate everyone coming to tonight's program, Steina in Conversation. Of course, we have this wonderful panel discussion to kind of launch into what we have following as our open receptioning, and hopefully you'll all come and join us upstairs and get to look at the galleries and join us for some wine and snacks and conversation to follow. My name is Emily Garner. I'm the Senior Program Manager here at the MIT List Visual Arts Center, and we're pleased to have you here tonight in attendance of this program. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, to please silence your cell phones for the duration of the program. And if anyone needs to use the restroom after the talk or during your time here, it's right above, out in the lobbies, out near the elevators, so there's under a green exit sign. But right now I'm going to actually turn over the formal panelist introductions over to my colleague, Curator Natalie Bell. So please join me in welcoming Steina, Chris Hill, and Gloria Sutton tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you all for being here tonight. This is a really magnificent occasion to be celebrating Steina and showing her work in Cambridge. My name's Natalie Bell. I'm the curator here at the List Center, and I'm really pleased to introduce Gloria Sutton, an esteemed art historian and associate professor of contemporary art and new media at Northeastern University, so right here in our neighborhoods. I'm also delighted that Gloria contributed to the book that we're producing around this exhibition, a wonderful essay. And Gloria is such an active writer that I feel especially pleased that she agreed to write for us.
It was an honor and a privilege, so absolutely, no question.
Thanks. And Gloria is currently at work on a book called Pattern Recognition, Contemporary Art in the Age of AI, which is a critical analysis of the rise of network culture within visual art. And we're also joined by Chris Hill, a media curator, artist, and educator who has known Steina and her late husband, Woody Vasulka, for a long time. Chris has taught countless students at CalArts, where she most recently served as associate dean of their film and video school. She also received her MFA from SUNY Buffalo, where Steina and Woody taught in the mid-1970s. And allegedly, she was their favorite student. She also was video curator for 10 years at Hallwalls in Buffalo. And her research and publications have investigated experimental film and grassroots video projects from the early 70s, among many other subjects. I think a key project of hers that some of you may be familiar with is surveying the first decade, video and alternative media in the US, which was a 1996 publication, which was accompanied by 16 hours of video on VHS tape in its first iterations. And it is basically a go-to syllabus on early video art. Chris also recently created a really fantastic project and educational tool and curatorial project and website, which is called a navigational tool for traversing the Vasulka mediascape. And I'll encourage you to Google this. Mm-hmm. It's a really wonderful project which looks at key citations and quotes from Steina and Woody over the years and maps their thinking and practice across various themes over time. It's a really special resource. And of course, Steina is our guest of honor. If you don't know her already, I think many of you do, that's why you're here. If you don't know her, this event is going to be a nice introduction. For over 5 decades, her work has traversed video and performance and installation through an interest in video signal and processing tools, and also what she has called machine vision. Steina was trained as a classical violinist, but she left music, mostly, not entirely, around 1970 to pick up video. That said, in my view, she always brought a musician's attention to temporality, or what she calls the majestic flow of time, to her new medium and her new tool, which initially was a Sony Portapak video camera. And unlike a lot of her peers working in video in its early decades, Steina was less interested in the camera's ability to show us the real world around us or have any fidelity to image making. Instead, what she was interested in at least in the early years, was video signal. So that'll be some of what we talk about tonight. But what was really special was that video signal was interchangeable with audio signals. And this opened up really radical possibilities for how images could be created, and especially images in real time. Playback as an exhibition is a focused retrospective, so it's looking at works from 1970 to 2000. The title, Playback, is firstly kind of thinking about video as a technology that allowed immediate playback, unlike film. This was a novelty at the time. And also really thinking about the importance of play as a theme and a concept within Steina's work, both coming from her background as a musician, and also as a kind of political stance, in a sense, of really not being interested in making objects for simple consumption, not necessarily making art objects as such, really just playing and experimenting and recording it at times, and just being interested in what was happening. So that's some of the things we'll be speaking about. I do want to mention that the show is organized in collaboration with the Buffalo AKG Art Museum, where we'll be traveling in March of next year, and then traveling onward from there to Reykjavik, where it'll be in a sort of expanded version at the National Gallery of Iceland and the Reykjavik Art Museum. So really pleased that all of those organizations have partnered with us on this and are equally excited to be showing Steina's work. Sorry for the long intro. Steina, could you talk a little bit, just to begin, about your transition from being a musician to working with video for the first time?
Yeah, I was stuck in New York. I was stuck with music. Once you are a musician, you are a musician. And there is nothing that can come between you and music. So I was then suddenly, as I said, in New York. And the only gigs I could get was like a freelancer. And it was Gilbert and Sullivan, and it was so awful to go into one thing after another like that. So I was definitely getting bored, but not, of course, bored with New York, because, as you know, once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker. And I think it is funny because we only lived there for like 80 years, but all our attitude, and especially this, that we came to this town in like in the late 60s and discovered America through New York. And we, of course, assumed that this is all of America was like New York. And it was a great disappointment to start traveling and seeing it wasn't exactly like that. Good answer?
Well, I'll keep going. How did you first get your hands on a camera?
I was an amateur photographer with this little cassette, they were a box like that. You usually got it on your confirmation, because we are a Christian nation, so-called. And therefore we get around the age of 13, we get a lot of gifts, and we get God to bless us. And God is always on our side, according to me. I have just so much love to be an Icelander, you have no idea. But anyhow, I got this photographic apparat, and there was nothing to be done. You couldn't even adjust focusing. So if you wanted a picture of anything, it was a distance, like you learned to know the distance, that it would be decent, and then no other pictures were out of focus. And I was very crazy about it. But when I chose to be something that I thought I was going to be, it was a musician. And for that I traveled. I got a kind of a stipend to go to Prague. And you have no idea what it is like to be an Icelander and then suddenly be in a European town of extraordinary beauty. And it took me a long time even to digest this majestic architecture they have there and everything. So I always think that I was blind until then because I wasn't really taking it all in. And but it was a very pleasant lifestyle to be taken care of by communists. It was very good. Anyhow, so I met Moody close to my departure because I realized that I was not going to live in that beauty of architecture for the rest of my life. And we had to get married. Why did we have to get married? Because I couldn't take him with me. I was not allowed to. In communism, you are the property of the state. And Woody had been in the military, and there was no way he was going to be allowed to go anywhere. So I pointed out to them, because I got to argue, that several Icelandic women women who studied in Prague had been able to take husbands with her. No, men. I'm left-handed and always a little confused. That the men had been able to take Czech women with them to Iceland. And this was no different, except he was man, and in the Marxist capitalism, there is very clear about that the men and women were equal. So they said, he can go as far as we are concerned, but you have to get the permission from Iceland. And I was just, I had to pretend that I was not laughing, but I was laughing. I'd never heard that an Icelander would have to get a permission from the government to get married. So anyhow, I called my father, and he worked that time in the government as a journalist, the state journalist or whatever. And he said, don't worry about it, I'll send you a thing that they cannot refuse. And he went in late night with a colleague, and the front door of the government was open. You didn't even need a key, you just opened the door and got in. And I got to to my father's room, and not I, he. I'm losing it. I'm like President Biden. Anyhow, he got, and the colleague, they got themselves a bottle of red wine, and they started the letter in a very classical Icelandic. We, the government, see no problem, and so on and so forth. And he took it down to the president's office, which was also open, and put on it this wax, this red wax, and the thing to legalize it. And that's how I knew that he would make it out of the country.
So your dad forged the paperwork?
Huh?
Your dad forged the paperwork?
Okay.
I mean, if the doors were unlocked, I think there was an invitation for forgery there. So when you and Woody got to New York,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about how New York felt at that time. If Prague made such an impression on you, I would have to think that downtown New York City in 1965 was making your head explode.
See, we first landed at the house called International House or something. That was a residency of mostly foreigners who were getting acquainted with America. And that was one kind of experience. But New York as a whole, even without the downtown, is still a magnificent place. There's just no question about it. So anyhow, our trip in downtown New York, or so-called Soho, which was barely getting to be recognized by the name Soho. We found a place on 14th Street, right next to Union Square, and we were in, and it was in. There was a sign everywhere that said like AIR, and an artist in residency, because it was illegal to want to live in a workplace. And of course, artists being illegal to begin with, maybe from birth, I don't know, they got all the floors from bottom to top, were filling up with artists. And friendships were very fast in coming, and Woody had started to dream about video because he saw the potential. I didn't yet, and we were separated. I was the musician, and he was the filmmaker. And that's how we lived the first 2-3 years. And then suddenly, Woody was asked to tape a group called Jethro Tull. and it was a fantastic experience. And the guys came to see us up in our loft and have something to eat and drink. And the next one was Jimi Hendrix. And I had never not paid much attention to American music, modern or old or whatever. That was out of my realm. And I heard this man play. And it didn't take me long until I was totally taken. And I couldn't understand, grasp it, you know. They came home from him playing, and it was either the show that he did with his trio at the last day of '69 or the first day of 1970. We have a recording of one of them. It totally flipped me. And from that moment on, I was a video person. That was it. And we were all beginners. I have kind of, strangely enough, found out lately, not from the beginning, that the first users basically on the West Coast was Bruce Nauman, and he bought one in '67 or '68. And in New York, it was Andy Warhol, who also bought about that time. And Andy was a neighbor. We lived on one side of Union Square. He lives on the other side. And Andy sort of flirted with everybody, including me, and I said, "Isn't this guy gay?" And I flirted back, and we got up to the first floor, the factory, so-called. And they all became friends, and were the first victim of my taping, because I have a lot of tape of Andy and his entourage, and which ended very often in something called the Max's Kansas City, which was on the other side of Union Square. And we saw that all the Andy folks could get a hamburger for free. How could I get it for free? Oh, Andy paid for it. And he paid for it until it was, I think, $10,000 for the 1 month. But about that time, we also asked Mickey, who ran Max's Kansas City, if he could be a subscriber. That is what Andy was. And we became subscribers. So whenever we came home late at night, and everything happened late at night in New York for those years, and we were hungry, we could get a hamburger, and once at the end of the month, we paid for it. And I've never heard about anything like that any other place. But that was New York. Everything was new and strange, and that you could subscribe for a hamburger late night. That's part of it. Any more questions?
Yes. Chris or Gloria, would either of you like to?
What's that?
Would either of you like to lob a question over? Or?
I'm sorry.
Would you like to ask Dana a question?
Oh, okay. What about participation? Could you talk about this time in New York when people didn't even know what video was, and you said, "Can I tape you?" And they said, "What does that mean?" And
The word video was unknown in the English language.
yeah. And then you brought them back to you could do immediate replay.
Yes.
Because it was different than film. It was like video had that possibility, and participation came out of that.
Yeah, I remember we had so many of those sketches, and they were funny, and we loved the people in Dublin and everything. It was kind of, and I asked Woody, "What are you going to call this tape?" And he said, "Participation." And I said, "Why? Why participation?" Because we were allowed to participate in this wonderful culture. And I had never thought of it that way until but that's what it was. Yeah. So what's the question?
You talked about how your loft was filled with people all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes it got to be too much almost, because it was so popular to come back to your place. And,
Yeah.
And then could you talk about how the kitchen became a solution to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was clear we didn't want to run any place already. I mean, that was too much New York, do it yourself kind of a thing. But we asked Mickey at Max's Kansas City if he could use his upstairs and show some videotapes. And the whole anti-Warhol crowd, as far as I'm concerned, came to see it and laugh and applaud. And there were 3 nights of just them going about in their doings. And there was a man there who we later found out was expert in preparing lofts for artists. He was Estonian, Andres Manning. And he said, "I have a place for you." And I said, "We are not interested." "Well, it doesn't matter that you're not interested. You should see this place. It is just a place you should see." And we went with him. And I was still hard-nailed that I was now going to do just video. And he opens the door and we come in, and Woody says, "I want this place." And that was the end of that. We just had to run this place. So Andy helped us to make it feasible. And what we did then was something that I think is quite Czech, but I'm not sure what it is or what was the idea. I asked him, "How are we going to run it?" And Woody said, we run it by the people who want to use it. And so we set up right away, we would have different genre of programming for each night. So music, electronic music was on Monday, and it was so popular it immediately split into Tuesday. And I sat on the opening, I sat with Shirley Clark, that some of your older folks here used to know. And she said, because she came from a film crowd, that she was always excluded. She wasn't one of the boys. And she said, you should have one open night. And I said, what is an open night? That's when anybody can come and do anything. And I accepted that. That was a very good idea. So, and then the rest of the week, that went to the parties and to the other kind of things, a little more established artists maybe. But this idea of how to run it was then that people came in, and also there were video artists, budding video artists. They came with the first tape they had ever made and said, can we play it or is it too late? I did the last edit 10 minutes ago and came running down to the kitchen to show it to his colleagues. And we decided that it would be free for the audience and that artists would not get paid. Or we would charge and either give the artist half of it or anything they wanted, which was they could either take the whole gate as they came or just part of it. So it ended with that we almost always got a gate. And there was actually only one artist who got the whole gate, and that was Namjoon. And I don't know, Namjoon said, but I took a cab to get down here, so that was $10, so I got that. You know. And Namjoon became a very loyal audience because he lived just 2 houses down from the kitchen. And he would always come in late, and he came in like celebrity because he knew we all know him and that he was kind of known. So he would come in and say, hi, hello, come. And we would get a chair and unclap it and put him in it, and he would instantly fall asleep. and the artist with his fresh tape played the tape, and it was okay, and we told it. And Namjoon gets up and waddles over to the guy and says, young man, you're a genius. This is just one, but it was like party every night. It was good. It was wonderful. So
maybe I was just going to interject and say one of the things that came out of the research for this exhibition, which for even all of us who are steeped in this material and know this history very well, I think it was a revelation to also think about your role both as a curator, organizer. You also, in addition to starting the kitchen, and one of the notes that I had was the way that we talk about it as art historians and we teach this material. The kitchen is still alive and well for many of us now in the new kind of iteration of its being, but it really, one of the moniker that you had attached to it was the kitchen LATL, which stood for Live Audience Test Laboratory. And it's really fallen off from most historical considerations of the kitchen in your work. And I think that was an important moment because it said, you know, it's this Live Audience Test Laboratory, you know, and in this conversation actually from '92 between Chris and Steina that you said, quote, we did not want the audience to know that they were some kind of laboratory rats for us, but that's what they were. I mean, you say this hyperbolically in the interview. They were the last concern we had. This place was for the artists to experiment in. If the audience did not like it, they could leave, right? So It's this overarching sense of what I think the exhibition and Natalie's curatorial idea around play as a kind of generative mode, but also that, you know, working against the even video at that time wasn't being oxygenated by galleries. There were no not-for-profit spaces, but the landscape looked really different, and you were involved in creating that. So in addition to the kitchen, you also curated or created the Women's Video Festival in 1972 at that time. So to me, these were these two parallel tracks that are still alive and well, and many of the contemporary artists that we think of, you know, now, you can trace that connection back to film programming that you started, advocating for women, international distribution of women filmmakers and video makers and artists, and also thinking about the kitchen less about a repertoire or trying to build a membership or play to audience expectations, but really to make it as a seat or a place for experimentalism.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a very good description.
That's my job. I'm on the side here for the historical. But it's just one of the things that when we go back, and I'll just interject and quickly say, I think this exhibition is extraordinarily going to be a big revelation for many of us, even if you think you know this material. And for two reasons. Number one, it makes very explicit something that I think has been implicit for quite some time, which is that yes, there's going to be a media archaeology. So many of you are going to walk in there and see material, video, monitors. And for some, it will be nostalgic. And for others, you're going to be like, what is this stuff, right? So there's, this idea, and not only about the materials and the media itself or the technology, but also the formats in which images and moving images and that vocabulary. In your entire career, we can really trace the entire media archaeology of a kind of move from a visual and the idea of a camera to what I really got inspired by was this move away from the absolute rejection of vision even being the predominant way of seeing something, or that it being a bodily experience. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see this kind of trace, and like I said, both in the way, the history of the medium, but also in the discourse. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'm super grateful for is in this exhibition, in your work, you blow apart art history's often over tight narrative around the history of video being so tied up to broadcast and television and themes of transmission and broadcast. Even in rejection of that, right? Artists who came up who were making video and experimental video because they were, contra to what was happening in mainstream broadcast television. And the other thing that your work does is pushes against the other parallel thread, which is cybernetic feedback being the other kind of networked idea. And anyway, I just, wanted to kind of think about the reframing, what it means to look at this work in 2024 is really important because it recasts a history, fills in a lot of gaps, like especially with Chris's work. But it also then opens up these other ways for us to think about things that are what we think of as moving image, where we don't have to keep trafficking in the same narratives of art history, visual studies, and film studies that have been really tethered towards theories of apparatus or film, and especially around screens and the kind of even framing of a screen. And so that to me is really exciting.
Yes.
So thank you.
Thank you.
And Natalie, too.
Well, thanks, Gloria. And just to build on that, Steina, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your transition to the machine vision series in 1975 and beginning to think about using technology, even simple mechanics, to create a multiplicity of views using the mirrored sphere that we see in all vision to create mirrored perspectives, and using the camera to show us things that we cannot see with our own eyes as humans.
Yeah, it's interesting that suddenly there was a phrase that was repeated time and time over, and that was real-time video, because it was so remarkable. If we had a 20-minute reel to reel, sort of, we could do 20 minutes of work. And if you had an hour, we could do a whole hour and then play the whole hour. And then this idea that camera, yes, but it didn't be a camera that came because we were looking at it and that they were the height of the eyes of human beings, which had always been to that time, you looked in and you filmed something and you had a control over it. Here you just turned the camera on and it could go on 24 hours a day. And philosophically, it is totally new and revolutionary. And I started thinking about that when you can put the camera elsewhere, where do you put it and how do you use it? And my other concern as a musician was, of course, that I need time. If there is no time, there is no music. It always has to move on timeline. So, I started thinking of how camera moved without an operator. And that is exactly that. You put it on a turntable, and it will go 24 hours a day, or whatever you want to. And it is actually already what later was called installation. But the word installation was usually not, it was used for plumbing, but not much for art. And then you start thinking about it differently about the movements of the camera. It is pan and tilt. They are the main, that is the words I was learning and being very impressed with. Pan, tilt, rotation. Then how do you make an image rotate? You put it on a device that is put on the front of the camera, of the lens, the lenses, and you have a gear on it, and a crystallic like formation that takes just a part of the image and then rotates it slowly. And I now have, I think, 2 or 3 ways of rotating, besides to take a turntable and just put it on the side, and then it does the. I'm just showing you how my mind is working, because you're always thinking, what can you do and how much? And there was a feature that came in first full time with video, and that was a zoom lens. And the filmmakers, they actually envied us a little bit. That they, when they got the 16mm or 8mm cameras, yeah, they could buy an extra lens that would be zoom lens, and it was expensive and it was very fancy. But video automatically got a zoom lens. And if you think about Ken Burns, or if you think about anything, zoom is so important. It is so much a part of moving image that they fake it. They take pictures of still images and so much so that the audience, the naive audience, thinks that they are really there with a camera. But I'm just trying to tell you that camera just in itself, creatively, is so interesting instrument, and you don't even have to be there. It just does its thing, whatever it is. So does that tell you? Now you know everything, yeah?
Yeah.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, I want to jump ahead, and I'll ask one more question, then we'll open it up. But the second part of our exhibition really moves quite dramatically into landscape, and I'd love to hear you reflect on the place of landscape and place in your work. I think you always used the surroundings that you were in as your raw material, but it really took on dramatic new dimensions when you moved to Santa Fe in 1980, both looking at the landscape of the Southwest, but also looking at the landscape of Iceland. So tell us a little bit about what it was like to start using landscape as your raw material.
Yes, I don't know what to say. I mean, it is so obvious for Icelanders that they think landscape, or I dare to assume that other Icelanders do this too. But I do this, for me, it is very emotional. And when you are watching national TV, like now there was a volcano doing its thing in Iceland, and as soon as you see the image come back, you say, this is Iceland. No, and that's me, but I think that most of us are like that. It's so special. And I go to neighboring country like Greenland or Faroe Islands or whatever, and it's also fantastic landscapes. They are not the same. The Icelandic landscape is very special. So it was a natural. It selected me. I didn't select the landscape. And then the other thing is that once you are in the Southwest and you go to Hollywood land, all this beautiful red stone everywhere, and often you recognize them. Oh, it's from that movie with John Wayne on it. It is also, you own it. You will know you own it differently from most other landscapes. And I don't know why that is. So, as you know, in order to make an image, you have to have something in front of the camera. And landscape for me is typically just something in front of the camera, something that will come in if I suck it in. it will be there. And my idea is like with the works here, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I made a proposal for the West, and then I immediately broke it and broke the spaces into installation, set it on 2 monitors, and I set all of the things with turntable. And it is amazing that that time, for those of you here who have been to like Chaco Canyon or anywhere in the South, it was totally unprotected when we moved there in 1980. So we could park the car right next to the guard or overseer in the empty parking lot and walk in. And we were like 8 or 10 people who went there, and we had with us food that we ate there, and paper plates and everything. And then somebody said, but we are being here too long, we can't really make it back. No, we want to sleep out here. And everybody found themselves some landscape or woody. I remember went under a rock that oozed out hot air because it had been a warm day. And it was only until like early morning that it got so cold he couldn't sleep anymore. But it was so romantic, it was unbelievable. And I placed the camera on the gizmo you have in upstairs or whatever, and set it into motion. And then we just climbed out of this Chaco Canyon, which is, do you all know what it is, Chaco Canyon? Mm-hmm. Yes, everybody has been there, knows what it is. And it is unthinkable now that you could go and make a tape like that in there without getting any permission from anybody. Mm-hmm. And that's what the luck we had. And also on the way to Chaco Canyon, we stopped by a very large array, VLA, and there was also, these are native boys who guard those things. Those are not native boys. And we said, where can we take pictures? Anywhere, he said. Can we be underneath the tower that holds it? Yeah, you can be anywhere you want to. So we did underneath, and we were getting fantastic pictures. And some guy comes down to us, and runs down and says, what are you doing here? You're ruining our data. And Woody, who was always very calm and insightful and ready to talk to anybody, he yells back, you are ruining our data. So that was my luck when we made the West. And because you're going to see it upstairs, be aware. I did all the pictures, and Woody, of course, was the chauffeur, but he did all the sound. And I think the soundtrack is just, for me, or at least was a great inspiration to make it. And that was the first major work that I did in New Mexico. That was the beginning. Is it good enough answer?
Wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
I'd love to open it up for questions at this point. Would anyone like to pose a question? Don't be shy.
I'll kick it off while people are here.
One here.
Oh, Antonio, yeah.
Thank you very much for this very, very interesting talk. I have a question concerning the meaning of machine vision in the series of works by Steina. The term today indicates forms of pattern recognition, as Gloria knows well. And so what happened in those works was completely different from the from the forms of kind of algorithmic recognition, detection that machine vision indicates now. And still, the series of works with this title by Steina participate in this history of an idea of a machine vision. So I wanted to know how she came to choosing this title and what it meant for her then.
Well, it is a lot of running to what are they called? This places where the military throws their garbage into. That's we would visit them already in New York. They were good places. Canal Street was the best for garbage that came from the Second World War. That's actually the turntable was from a computer in the Second World War, and we would sometimes joke about it, like how many human lives had to be ended by this machine. But once we met with John Whitney, who was a remarkable filmmaker, and we started talking, and he had exactly the same machine. He had also bought it on Canal Street. And see, that was our source. And then finally we are in New Mexico, very close to Los Alamos, which every Thursday they threw out stuff. And that is where I basically got all these gizmos, because they needed them for some lab tests. But it was a little always weird to be using surplus, that is the word I was waiting for. That we had to use surplus machines to make life, as I felt, out of industries that was interested in killing men. So that's a sad. That's a sad end. I think we can finish.
But I might throw in and say that there was also this digital image articulator, this very modest DIY machine that you came out of the studio that blended editing techniques with computational early programming commands, allowing Steina to basically control and modify, so bump up contrast, create these kind of static glitches, elongate sequences in relationship to early computer programming, so that while and it was very detailed. So this DIA, digital image articulator, was this kind of hybrid machine that took on computational programmatic ways of making video act like computational, sort of giving it digital affordances before avant la lettre, I would say. So maybe that would be another way, that's kind of these mechanisms that she created. They were sort of bespoke, modest, and they were never meant to be, large scale. But then you get into kind of early computational affordances around compositing images and moving against, I would say, the commercial software mandate for calibration and image refinement. She's absolutely doing the opposite. And before we get the word glitch as a kind of 21st century feminist idea of disruption, Steina had noise and static, and she was working against, like I said, the kind of mandate towards calibration and image refinement.
Right. Yeah. Do you want to say anything at the end?
Well, there's a lot to say. Maybe the precursor to the machine vision was also that you and Woody had discovered that you didn't need a camera to create an image, right? And that you were interested in actually being able to show frequencies and waveforms and voltage,
right,
which was the basic material of video at a time when all artists, whether they were painters or musicians or even filmmakers, were marking on the film, right?
Yes.
So they're interested in the material. So you were interested in the material of video, and so in a way, the machine vision also started with the images that you could make the machines come up with, your dialogues with tools, essentially.
Yes.
I would add to that too. I think it comes out of this desire to create a non-anthropocentric perspective, more than to sort of fetishize a machine perspective, to really step away from being the author or being the eye behind the camera.
Yeah, non-human mechanisms of visibility. I think even kind of pointing to ideas of tracking and surveillance, and non-lens-based, taking non-lens-based mechanisms of capture and mirroring towards more computational affordances of compositing and compression.
I would encourage you, if anybody looks at some of the early, especially the early works, the analog works, and feels confused about what they're seeing, I would immediately go to watch Violin Power. And I think, maybe like Violin Power is a series of experiments, basically, that Steina did with her analog violin, where the audio was basically connected to the video, parts of the monitor that control the video image, and you can really see how you begin to, because you understand what you're hearing, and then you actually can see it on the screen. So I think that's like an amazing handshake with the audience, actually. Even though you didn't make it for that necessarily, but in retrospect, it works like that.
Yeah, no, it was a work over time, because first I did the Beatles song, because that was the day it came out on the radio, WBAI New York. And first I heard just amazing music, and then I said, who is playing this? It was the Beatles. So I taped it immediately. Then I made this kind of, I learned the text so I could say, wake up to the sound of music, and so on and so forth. And then they came, because whenever I needed to put audio in or make a thing that was moving and also producing audio, I always had my violin. It was right there then. So that work lasted in production from 1970 early to 78 to 79 when I did the last cut. So just when I had all these cuts together, I just cut them, so they became a tape. And Woody did the title. He did most of my titles, like Orbital Obsession and Violin Power. He was very good on that. It helps to be a foreigner from far away to really speak good English. Okay?
Well, so Stan, I'd like to ask you directly, because we've been talking around this topic about how technology is developing. You started out, it was black and white, it was analog. And you've talked a lot about how you were looking for tools, being playful, and these obviously were, it was a palette that really did encourage you to be, I don't know how to say it, maybe human, with that focus on analog. Now we're moving into artificial intelligence. I mean, there's a spectrum, or is it a continuum? I guess what I want to ask you is, when you started dealing with digital tools as opposed to analog, did you have a feeling that, oh, this is what I've always wanted to do, or this is different, I don't like it? Or, what was it for you when you transitioned from one kind of a modality to another? Especially, say, like analog to digital.
Yeah, I mean, the transition from analog audio or classical audio to video was a big deal. And when I look back at it, already like week after, when I had made this decision, I realized I had always been a lousy violinist. Really, I was never going to make it in any way, hardly into the last stand or the second violin. It was just not that. But my whole life is about video, always audio. That's always the essence of my being, as I would say. But
What about
the
going
transition
from
to
yeah.
digital was very different, and it was actually first hostile. We video makers in classical tradition, we were very clear that we had the ultimate medium, and now came in this industrial capitalistic thing called digital video to ruin us all. But as soon as I started using it, I felt I had gotten more and more to, because I kept having all my classical tools and way to make images, but there was always in analog video, you have an access to the whole frame, and that's it. Then comes next frame. And as a matter of fact, when we discovered it was that simple, it was just like film. It was frame by frame, and the motion is made by going from the one to the next, to the next, to the next. We had gotten additional, I had gotten at least, now Woody too, Woody even more, because he could build those very complicated electronic circuits that were digital in our organization. And for me, it was a tool where I could finally go in to the image. I could go point by point, and it was just a matter of addressing it and the right software. And I could change the red color to blue, and the blue color to this. Everything you see now in the ads on commercial TV, I saw just as soon as I touched a video approach that I could do. So it was a kind of a additional capacity to make something.
You know, I remember hearing this story, and maybe I got it a little wrong, but Woody and Hollis Frampton, who also taught in the department, wanted to create a digital tool, but they were incredibly expensive. So this was just before the digital image articulator that was developed with Jeffrey Shearer. And so Woody and Hollis decided to basically solder together a frame buffer so they could digitize one frame of video and control it. So, you know, and I think when they started out, had they purchased the unit that was completely soldered, it would have cost $50,000. And it took them like 2 or 3 years to do it. And then by the time they finished it, it had come down like to $10,000 or $12,000. So, but this interest in actually really understanding exactly how to make this transition, you know, because you were interested in what happened, you know, and how to control the frame.
Yes, yes. And it was an additional, so in our culture, say with Hollis, who was so much a filmmaker and had a reputation that way, was the witnessing of how you make digital tools. That Jeffrey Shire, who was working with us, a student of ours, he would say, at this point, and he pointed at the drawing we had, you have a choice. You can go this way or that way. It can be an image of 2 or image of 3 or something like that. What do you want? And Woody gave this answer, both. And after a while, Jeffrey would say, we can do it this way and that way, which we want both. And he could answer it too, because it was the richness, you know. When your art material is made only of zeros and ones, you always have this 1-0 opportunity to change something. Because you make then 0, and right after that comes where the signal goes next, and they say, do you want to have it go 0 or 1? And to see this all and discuss what effect and it was worth it, is something that we experienced by building the tour. It was very important.
I hope, Chris, could you say the name of your website again? Because I think one of the things that I hope people take away from this exhibition is twofold. One, again, the relevancy and the contemporaneity of the work, but also the history that you map in there. And just looking at, C.T. Louis, there's a whole, people think they know this history, but your primary research materials are so invaluable. So I just would love for you to say it again, the name of the site.
So I developed a project for the Vesulka Kitchen Archive in Brno, which has some of the Vesulka archive, and it's called a navigational tool for traversing the Vesulka archive, and you can find it at the Vesulka Kitchen Archive website, and it's, I forget how many, there's like tiles that you can interact with. Maybe there's over 100, and most of them are from interviews with Woody and Steina. So you can hear what their ideas were in their own voices. And then, you can read, it's kind of a lengthy quote, and then there's a link to the actual project, which is usually in the Vesulka archive at this point. So, please find your way there and get lost.
And then I'll just say thanks to Natalie, too, because curation equals conservation. So when curators actually do the work to put these exhibitions together, that's usually when this work gets preserved, repaired, conserved, or re-examined in that way. And so it becomes viable for another generation of work. And so the other thing that Natalie did is, in addition to orchestrate this extraordinary exhibition, she also edited, I think, an extraordinary catalog with contributions from Ina Blom and others that I think also do the double lift. And it's something that I think is a hallmark of the list. And it's programming here historically to look at areas that we think we know very well, and to actually uncover new histories, open them up, create some more porosity around topics that we think are hermetically sealed. And so the catalog does that in a very robust way that the exhibition running parallel to the exhibition. So that's a double hat trick.
Gloria,
there.
thanks for doing the catalog plug for me.
Yeah.
Good order here.
Right there, yeah.
And shout out to Joey Heinen as well, who is also a contributor.
Great,
is here
yes.
with us. We're looking forward to this book very much. It will come out in spring of 25 with MIT Press and Buffalo AKG. And I wish we had more time for questions, but I want everyone to also enjoy the exhibition and some wine in our reception. So please join me in thanking all of our panelists here, and especially Steina.
Yeah.